The annual church fundraiser had always been my favorite event. The crisp autumn air mixed with the aroma of freshly baked goods, the laughter of children playing games, and the sense of community that brought us all together. But this year felt different. There was a chill in the way some of the congregation barely met my eyes. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was nothing more than my own insecurity playing tricks on me. I was standing by the dessert table arranging pumpkin pies when I overheard Pastor Allen's voice wafting over from a few yards away. He was speaking with Mrs. Green, a pillar of our church community. Her expression was one of deep concern, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. As I leaned closer, pretending to adjust the tablecloth, his words struck me like a slap. Yes, unfortunately, it seems she's been embezzling money from the fundraiser's funds. I couldn't believe my ears. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization washed over me. That was why people had been so cold. Pastor Allen, who I had trusted implicitly, was spreading these lies about me. I felt the room spin slightly, the chatter of the hall fading into a dull hum as I tried to process what I'd just heard. I remained rooted to the spot, my mind racing. I wanted to march over there and confront him, to demand how he could betray me like this. But I knew that would only escalate the situation and potentially cause a scene, confirming to others what he was accusing me of. Instead, I took a deep breath, calming myself. I needed to think this through. As the evening wore on, I moved through the event in a daze, offering smiles that didn't reach my eyes and engaging in conversations I barely remembered. Each interaction carried a weight it hadn't before. Every flicker of doubt in someone's gaze felt like a brand against my skin. I needed to find a way to clear my name, but first I needed to understand how this all started. I finally decided to leave the fundraiser early. As I walked to my car, the cool night air helped clear my head a bit. I couldn't let this lie fester and spread. I had to get to the bottom of it, but tonight I needed rest. Tomorrow I'd find a way to confront this head-on, to unravel the truth behind Pastor Allen's betrayal. The drive home felt longer than usual. Each passing streetlight cast fleeting shadows that seemed to mimic the whispers weaving through the congregation. My stomach churned as I tried to piece together how this nightmare had begun. Pastor Allen's betrayal had hit me like a thunderbolt. Here I was, devoted to a community I'd loved and served faithfully, now ostracized because of this unfounded accusation. I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking back over every interaction I'd had with the finance team, trying to figure out if I'd missed something, some moment when things had started to unravel. I knew I was innocent, but innocence was no shield against the judgmental stares and whispered conversations that now followed me at every turn. As the night wore on, I sat at my kitchen table, trying to remember anything peculiar. I replayed every meeting, every handshake and nod, looking for a clue. But all I found was the same tangled confusion, the same aching sense of betrayal. I felt like a stranger in what had once been a second home. The finance meetings had always been straightforward, our conversations centered on budgets and charitable allocations. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The only unusual element in recent weeks was Pastor Allen's sudden interest in the accounts. I had initially thought he was just being diligent, maybe looking to better understand the financial workings. Now, that memory felt tainted, his interest perhaps a mask for more sinister intentions. I wondered if something had changed within the church structure that warranted his meddling in our affairs. Had there been some new directive from the board? Or, dreadfully, was this a personal vendetta against me? My mind drifted back to the last finance meeting. Becky, the treasurer, hadn't seemed any different. If anything, she had been as amicable as always, cracking jokes about tax season. Nothing she had said or done hinted she might be complicit in this web of lies. Yet, it was hard to gauge sincerity when masked by everyday pleasantries. The rest of the team had been equally unsuspecting. Mark, the secretary, had walked me through the budget projections without so much as a flicker of doubt in his eyes. We'd laughed over the predictably high expense of the annual fundraiser decorations, a joke that now seemed to sting in its innocence. Could any of them truly believe these accusations? I placed my head in my hands, racking my brain for any small detail that could provide clarity, but found only shadows of doubt. My integrity was at question, and my words seemed weighed down by the whispers of rumor. I longed for morning when I could start piecing together the truth. But tonight, all I could do was sift through the ashes of my shattered trust. I decided to pull out the financial statements I had at home. Though they were personal copies, they were a start. I reviewed every transaction, every check and balance, searching for anything that might have fed into the pastor's lie. Still, nothing. Everything matched perfectly, just as it should. As I ended my review, there was still no epiphany, nothing that explained why or how these accusations had taken root. Who else could have set this in motion? And more hauntingly, why hadn't anyone confronted me directly? Was it fear of conflict, or was something deeper festering beneath the surface? As I finally crawled into bed, the weight of betrayal lay heavy on my chest. I felt isolated, the looming question of why me circling endlessly in my mind. Yet, through the haze of hurt and confusion, one thing remained crystal clear. I had to prove my innocence. I had to do it not just for myself, but for every memory of trust and camaraderie that had once thrived in our community. Despite the night's turmoil, a quiet determination began to form. Tomorrow, I'd start seeking the answers I desperately needed. I would unravel this mystery, one thread at a time, until the truth stood tall and undeniable. Even in the solitude of doubt, I knew I had to face whatever lay ahead with courage. The dawn would bring new possibilities, and with it, the hope of restoring the respect and trust I had once held dear. The dawn arrived sooner than I was ready, carrying a light that felt sharper than usual in its clarity. I dressed with purpose, my mind on a singular goal, a meeting with Becky, the church treasurer. I had to tread carefully, framing our conversation around my regular duties so as not to alarm her or tip my hand too early. I needed to gather information, not raise defenses. The church hall was quiet when I arrived, the usual morning bustle muffled as I entered. The cool air inside did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest as I made my way to Becky's office. She sat behind her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and a computer screen that seemed too bright for the early hour. Her demeanor was as I expected, welcoming, tinged with the mild curiosity of a person who hadn't yet heard the rumor. "Good morning, Becky," I offered a smile, hoping to mask the tension simmering just beneath the surface. "Morning," she replied, her voice friendly. "What brings you in so early?" "Just some questions about the fundraiser accounts," I replied, slipping into the chair across from her. "I thought it might be helpful to go over them together, ensure everything is in order." Becky nodded, seemingly oblivious to the storm swirling around us. She began pulling up the documents, clicking through files with practiced ease. As she worked, I listened intently, looking for any clue, any slip that might hint at the roots of Alan's deceit. As we reviewed the figures, everything seemed routine, yet one detail caught my attention: Becky's casual remark about Pastor Alan. "Oh, and Alan's been very hands-on lately, hasn't he? He's been double-checking the accounts himself." Her tone was light, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. I kept my voice steady as I asked, "Really? Has he mentioned why?" Trying to keep it conversational, though inside, my suspicions were solidifying. Becky shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "Not really, just said he wanted to ensure the integrity of everything." Her words carried an innocent tone, but to me they were laced with new meaning, an unintended confirmation of my growing fears. I nodded along, my expression carefully neutral. "Well, it's always good to have multiple eyes on things," I commented, though my heart was racing. Becky's inadvertent revelation had set the groundwork for my next steps. As our meeting wrapped up, I thanked her and made my way back through the quiet halls. My mind was ablaze with questions and half-formed theories. Alan's involvement felt calculated now, his actions more motivated than merely observing church finances. What was he looking for or trying to fabricate? The pieces of this puzzle were slowly shifting into place. I stepped out into the fresh air, my resolve only strengthened. It was evident that Alan was the source of this turmoil, his hands subtly crafting a narrative that painted me as a villain. But why? What was there to gain from tarnishing my name? These thoughts lingered, but I knew focusing directly on them now wouldn't yield the clarity I needed. I walked home, each step weighed by the mix of betrayal and the clarity of purpose that morning had brought. I had to gather more evidence, something undeniable that would not only clear my name but expose the truth. Becky's unwitting confession was the first solid lead, and I would follow it wherever it led. Alan's motivations were his own, but I was determined they wouldn't overshadow the truth. The warmth of the sun did little to ease the chill of isolation I felt from the community that had once been a second family. I was an outsider now, not through my actions, but through his lies. Yet that outsider status provided a perspective, a drive to root out the injustice that had entrenched itself within our church's walls. As I reached my front door, I took a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the morning's discoveries settle within me. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but I had already begun to unravel the truth. With the quiet determination that had seen me through so much of life's trials, I vowed to see this through. I wasn't seeking revenge, but a return to honesty and trust, not just for myself, but for the congregation I still cared deeply about. The next steps would require patience and strategy. I needed documentation, timelines, something tangible to hold against the whispers and suspicions bred by Alan's accusations. It would take time, but I had that, time and truth on my side. And with those allies, I knew I would prevail. After leaving that meeting with Becky, the pieces of a darker puzzle began to fit together in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that Pastor Allen had a hand in this tangled web. Becky's comment about Allen reviewing the finance records himself kept resurfacing with a renewed sense of urgency. It wasn't typical for him to delve into the accounts. Such tasks were the finance team's domain, purely procedural. Yet, there he was, inserting himself into the numbers that had led to my alleged downfall. As I walked through the fading afternoon light, I began to question everything I thought I knew about people I had long trusted. Pastor Allen was always so charismatic, with a reassuring presence that had guided the congregation through many challenges. But now, it seemed that behind his warm sermons was a colder calculation, a sharpness disguised as pastoral care. I found myself replaying every recent interaction with him, scrutinizing his words for clues I might have missed. Had there been hints of this betrayal, unnoticed under the guise of spiritual conversation? Had his eyes lingered too long on a ledger, or his words been infused with a hidden agenda? The more I considered it, the more certain I became that this was no innocent inquiry on his part, but a deliberate move to shift the shadows of suspicion onto someone else, me. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts and planning my next move, careful not to tip my hand too soon. Every interaction at church felt laden with undercurrents I couldn't fully name. With each polite smile and nod, I wondered who among them had already judged me based on Alan's assertions. The reality was painful, but it strengthened my resolve to pursue the truth without resorting to his dishonest tactics. My evenings were now dedicated to rifling through receipts, cross-referencing emails, and compiling a meticulous timeline. Each piece of evidence, no matter how small, was a potential step towards clearing my name. I knew I needed to establish a pattern to counter the claims against me. This was a battle of documents, not emotions, and I would not falter in my search for justice. I had built my life around this community, and I couldn't allow the whispers of embezzlement to dismantle everything I held dear. The thought of stepping into the church, feeling the weight of unfounded accusations, was enough to fuel my quiet determination. I was fighting not just for myself, but for all those who believed in the goodness of our shared faith, untainted by the deceit that now colored their perception. Late one night, as I pored over a particularly convoluted section of finance reports, I noticed something that didn't add up. It was a minor inconsistency, a tiny thread that, when pulled, revealed the possibility of other alterations. The realization sent a chill through me. I needed more, something undeniable, before confronting the issue publicly. But this small discovery was a glimmer of hope, a sign that I was on the right path. The days turned into a rhythm of work and silent investigation. I maintained my routine, attending church functions and fulfilling my obligations, each interaction a balancing act between maintaining composure and the rising tide of frustration. But there was a resolve within me that wouldn't be shaken. The truth was there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. In the solitude of my evenings, I strategized how I would present my findings to the church board. Every detail had to be precise, every fact unassailable. I couldn't rely on assumptions or half-truths, only the cold, hard evidence that would dismantle Alan's accusations against me. My instincts told me this was the only way to get the board's attention, by presenting a clear and definitive timeline that contradicted his narrative. And so, I continued, a quiet force determined to see the truth prevail. As I pieced together the convoluted puzzle, I felt a sense of purpose settle within me. This was more than just a defense of my integrity. It was a battle for transparency and accountability, for myself and the community I loved. In those moments of quiet reflection, I saw the path ahead, not as a struggle against a man, but against the lies he had spun. My resolve was not born of vengeance, but of a deep belief in the values we had built together and a commitment to preserving them. And with each small victory in my pursuit of truth, I felt the distance between me and the deception that sought to define me begin to close. The day of the meeting finally arrived, carrying with it that strange mixture of dread and determination. I had called for it as formally as I could, sending a request to each board member, outlining my intention to address the serious allegations against me. They agreed, though I could sense an undercurrent of skepticism woven into their responses, a shadow of Alan's influence. As I entered the church hall where the board gathered, my heart drummed a steady rhythm of resolve. I nodded at familiar faces, reading their expressions like a book laced with doubt and curiosity. Alan sat at the head of the table, an air of calm authority wrapped around him like a cloak. He glanced at me, his eyes an unspoken challenge lingering in the air. I met his gaze with a quiet, unwavering stare, refusing to let the unease seep into my posture. The board chair, Mrs. Peterson, opened the meeting, her voice warm yet carrying the weight of the moment. I sat there, my folder of meticulously curated evidence in front of me, a silent testament to the weeks of tireless effort and sleepless nights. Mrs. Peterson's words faded into the background as I gathered my thoughts, ready to lay bare the truth. When my turn came, I stood steadying myself and began to speak. "I've come here today," I said, "to clear my name and present evidence that contradicts the claims made against me." My voice was steady, devoid of the nerves that had plagued my rehearsals at home. I laid out my evidence with precision, starting with the timeline that starkly contrasted Alan's accusations. Every piece of correspondence, every receipt was accounted for, meticulously aligned to the events leading to the fundraiser. I spoke deliberately, each word carefully chosen to cut through the web of lies that had been spun. As I detailed the discrepancies I found in Alan's handiwork, a palpable shift crept into the room, attention snapping, focus sharpening as I methodically dismantled each falsehood. Alan's expression remained impassive, a still mask of practiced indifference. But I could feel the tension coiling beneath his facade, like a predator sensing its prey slip through its grasp. I continued, drawing attention to the alteration in finance reports that suggested tampering and inconsistency too glaring to ignore. My heart pounded in my chest as I laid the final piece on the table, bank statements that clearly underscored the absence of any embezzlement. There was silence, a heavy, oppressive kind that filled the room with its weight. A few on the board exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, whispers barely audible. The air shifted with the undeniable truth of my words. Pedersen looked down at the documents, her expression morphing from skepticism to contemplation. As I returned to my seat, the heaviness lifted slightly, my heartbeat echoing the resolve that held me steady. Alan's gaze turned sharper, his eyes narrowing as if he were recalibrating, searching for the next move in his failing game. His voice sliced through the room, insisting on his innocence and questioning the validity of my findings. But his words lacked conviction, the cracks in his composure widening with each defense that fell flat. For a moment, I allowed myself to revel in the quiet satisfaction of the truth breathing life into the room. I didn't argue, nor did I rise to his provocation. Instead, I listened, absorbing the unfolding narrative of desperation and denial. The board, now animated with renewed understanding, began to question Alan's oversight, poking holes in his once unassailable stance. Becky, ever the meticulous treasurer, leaned forward, her own notes in hand, ready to dissect the inconsistencies in Alan's financial reviews. Mark, the secretary, nodded in agreement, an ally now in deciphering the tangled threads of deceit. With each inquiry, each probe into the facts, Alan's resistance began to erode, the cracks in his armor widening to expose the vulnerability beneath. My evidence stood resilient, a bulwark against the tide of his unraveling narrative. Mrs. Peterson, sensing the shifting tide, called for a temporary recess, allowing the board to privately confer. As they stepped out, I remained seated, my mind a still ocean of calm amid the storm I had initiated. Alan lingered for a moment, the room silent but for the echo of hushed footsteps. His eyes bore into mine, a futile attempt to reclaim control that slipped through his fingers like sand. In that fleeting moment, I realized the power of truth. It wasn't a weapon I wielded, but a beacon that illuminated the shadows cast by deceit. As the door closed behind him, I felt a quiet assurance settle within me, a steady promise of the justice to come. The battle was not yet over, but the tides had begun to turn, setting the stage for what lay ahead. With my head held high, I awaited their return, ready to face whatever resolution the board would reach. The boardroom felt eerily silent as I sat, waiting for their return. The moment's gravity pressed down on me, yet I held on to a resolve. My evidence was sound. The truth had been laid bare. I refused to let fear or doubt cloud the outcome. When the board finally reassembled, a sense of purpose emanated from each member. Mrs. Peterson resumed her position at the head of the table, eyes sharp as they fixed on Alan, who had chosen a seat as far from me as possible. His demeanor had shifted, the earlier bravado now replaced with defiance. Mrs. Peterson began. "We have examined the preliminary evidence and will require a more detailed review." Her gaze turned to me, a reassurance flickering in her eyes. "However, the discrepancies in your documentation, Alan, are concerning. Can you clarify why there's a variance in the financial reports specifically around the dates you claim to have reviewed them?" Alan hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the papers in front of him. He tried for confidence. "It's simply a misunderstanding. Mistakes happen." "Not mistakes, Alan," Becky interrupted, her voice unwavering. These are deliberate alterations. I cross-referenced the statements multiple times. Her eyes bore into his, unyielding. I watched Alan's face pale, the facade crumbling. He floundered for a moment, then leaned forward, trying to regain control. Surely you're not taking her word over mine with no definitive proof. I met his gaze. The proof is right there in the bank statements. No funds went missing. Your versions of the documents don't match the originals, which we've all seen. Mark, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. The board is inclined to believe the evidence presented. We're committed to transparency and integrity in our community. We need to know why this was overlooked by you, Alan. Alan's responses grew more fragmented, his attempt at defending himself unraveling. He resorted to vague excuses, claiming he was under immense pressure, but the board wasn't swayed. I stayed silent, letting his own words dig deeper into the pit he'd created. The room felt like a courtroom, the jury's judgment looming ever closer. My heart, a steady drum in my chest, reminded me of what was at stake: my reputation, my community, my truth. Alan's faltering explanations were met with skepticism from Mrs. Peterson, whose patience seemed to thin with each passing moment. She finally leaned back, her decision clear. We'll need a comprehensive audit, but until then, Alan, we must ensure transparency in the process. Your role will be temporarily reassigned. The announcement hit Alan like a wave, his expression flickering between disbelief and acceptance. It was the beginning of his fall from grace, the unraveling of his deception witnessed by all. As I watched the scene unfold, a sense of relief and vindication washed over me. The truth had prevailed, shining a light on the shadows that had threatened to engulf me. I knew then that justice would take its course, guided by the unwavering beacon I'd held aloft. I stood, nodding once to Mrs. Peterson in acknowledgement of her fairness. The tides had indeed turned, and though the battle wasn't entirely over, the path forward was clear. With the quiet strength that had carried me through, I left the room, my head held high, ready to embrace whatever came next. The board's decision to conduct a full audit felt like a vindication of my silent efforts. Once the meeting ended, they promptly set up an independent team to delve into the church's financial records. I knew what they'd find, and it was only a matter of time before Alan's deception came to light. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance, watching from the sidelines as the auditors combed through every transaction with a fine-toothed comb. They were thorough, leaving no stone unturned. The atmosphere in the church was tense. Whispers of speculation filled the air during Sunday services, and I couldn't help but notice how differently people treated Alan. His usually commanding presence seemed to falter under the weight of scrutiny. I kept my interactions with him to a minimum, mostly exchanging cold nods across the room. Eventually, the results of the audit came back, and the findings were HUD. Alan had manipulated the records to cover his personal expenses, an act of betrayal not just against me, but against the entire congregation. News of his suspension rippled through the community, and those who had once regarded me with suspicion now offered hesitant apologies, their eyes reflecting a mix of regret and relief. Alan's fall from grace was swift. The board had no choice but to suspend him from his duties, a move that was both painful and necessary. Mrs. Peterson made the announcement during a congregation meeting, her voice but tinged with sadness for what our community had lost in trust. We must hold each other accountable, she stated, the words hanging in the air like a solemn vow. And we must move forward with integrity. I stood amidst the crowd. As the gravity of Alan's actions truly sank in, his betrayal had cut deep, leaving a scar that would take time to heal. I thought about all the times I'd quietly endured the side eyes and whispers, my resolve never to confront him publicly. This was not my victory dance, but a moment of reflection on the power of truth. Alan himself was absent, having chosen to avoid what was surely a moment. His absence was its own kind of presence, a ghost that lingered in the pews and hallways where he once preached. As people shuffled out of the meeting, I noticed Becky lingering near the door, her eyes meeting mine with an unspoken understanding. She had been my silent ally, her support a beacon during the storm. The church, now embroiled in the aftermath of Alan's actions, was left to pick up the pieces. But amidst the reconstruction, a newfound strength emerged, a unity forged not from blind trust, but from the resilience of a community that had faced adversity together. I felt a pride knowing that my actions had not just cleared my name, but had also fortified the moral backbone of the congregation. Even as I watched the tides shift, I knew my part in this chapter was closing. With every nod of forgiveness, I felt the weight of the past lift, and with it a sense of clarity about my future. The truth had indeed prevailed, and with that, I found peace. Though Alan's downfall was his own doing, I couldn't help but feel a compassion for the man who had lost his way. And so, as the congregation slowly rebuilt its foundations on transparency and hope, I prepared for my own new beginning. It was time to step aside, allowing the community to thrive anew without the shadows that had once clouded its path. In the weeks that followed Alan's suspension, the church buzzed with whispered conversations and quiet rebuilding. I found myself unexpectedly thrust into a position of leadership, as the board temporarily reinstated me to help guide the community through these challenging times. The offer came as both a surprise and a relief, a tangible acknowledgement of my innocence and competence. But a part of me knew this was not where I was meant to stay. Feeling the eyes of the congregation upon me, I accepted their decision with grace, fully aware that my time here was drawing to a close. My heart was already set on forging a new path, unburdened by the shadows of past betrayals. On a crisp morning, as the autumn leaves painted the ground with fiery hues, I stepped into the church one last time. The air inside was different, lighter almost, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after holding their breath for too long. I gathered my belongings from the small office I had occupied for years. Each item held a memory, a reminder of the time spent nurturing this community. As I closed the door behind me, I heard footsteps in the corridor. It was Becky, her face a mixture of gratitude and something else, perhaps a sadness at seeing me go. She embraced me warmly, whispering words of thanks for standing firm when the truth was almost lost. Her support had been a beacon, guiding me through the storm, and I promised to keep in touch, knowing this was not a farewell but a transition. Outside, the sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the church grounds. I walked toward my car, stopping for one last glance at the place that had been both a sanctuary and a battlefield. The board had assured me that all financial records were now in order, Alan's attempts to blame me fully exposed. The sense of vindication was profound, a concrete, unwavering victory that had restored not just my reputation but also my faith in justice. I drove away from the church, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The road stretched out before me, an open invitation to new beginnings. I soon found a new congregation, one where the air was thick with acceptance and the thrill of starting anew. Here, my past was a story unspoken, my presence welcomed without the shadows of suspicion. As I settled into this fresh chapter, I carried with me the lessons learned from the ordeal. The power of truth, the strength of community, and the resilience of the human spirit had seen me through the darkest times. I knew that I would bring these gifts to my new home, enriching the lives of those around me without the need for grand gestures or triumphs. My decision to step down had not been taken lightly, yet it felt right. The church I left behind would continue to heal, their newfound transparency a testament to the trials endured. I put the past gently to rest, choosing instead to look forward with hope and purpose. In the quiet of my heart, I knew that I had not only reclaimed my integrity but had also paved the way for my own redemption. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but standing here now, I felt at peace. Vindication was mine, not in loud proclamations, but in silent resilience. My story was not just one of betrayal and revenge, but also of growth and renewal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I greeted the evening with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for the road ahead.